March 12, 1945. Luzon, Philippines. Private First Class Yamamoto Kenji sits with his back against a banyan tree, his rifle across his knees, watching dawn break over mountains that no longer belong to Japan. The light comes slowly here, filtering through triple canopy jungle in shafts that remind him of the temple near his childhood home. But there are no prayers in this place. Only waiting. His unit, what remains of it, numbers 17 men. 3 weeks ago, they were a company of 143. The Americans did not destroy them in a single battle. They simply ground them down, day after day, patrol after patrol, until the jungle itself seemed to have swallowed the missing. Kenji's hands rest on his rifle, but his fingers trace the small photograph tucked into his breast pocket. His mother. His younger sister. The plum tree in their garden that would be blooming now, if spring had come to Osaka as it always did. He does not remove the photograph. To look at it would be to acknowledge how far away they are. How unreachable. Lieutenant Sato moves between the men, his boots making no sound on the forest floor. He has that way about him still, the bearing of an officer, even though his uniform hangs loose on a frame that has lost 20 pounds in as many days. He pauses beside Kenji, looking out at the same dawn. "You are awake early, Yamamoto." "I could not sleep, sir." "None of us sleep well anymore." It is true. The Americans have a way of making the night unbearable. Loudspeakers broadcasting Japanese voices, calling them to surrender. Recorded messages from prisoners, promising food and safety. The voice of a captured officer explaining that Japan has lost the war, that continued resistance is meaningless. Kenji closes his eyes against the memory of last night's broadcast. The voice had sounded so certain. So rational. So much like surrender was simply common sense rather than the ultimate shame. "They will try again today," Lieutenant Sato says quietly. "The psychological warfare." "Yes, sir." "What do you think, Yamamoto? Are they telling the truth?" The question startles Kenji. Officers do not ask such things. Officers give orders, and soldiers obey. That is the structure that holds the world together. Yet here, in this shrinking pocket of forest with no supply line and no hope of reinforcement, the old certainties have begun to crack. "I think." Kenji chooses his words carefully. "I think truth is less important than duty." Lieutenant Sato nods slowly. "My grandfather would have said the same thing. He was a samurai, you know. Before the Restoration. He had 2 swords and a philosophy that fit in 7 words, loyalty above life, honor before death." Kenji has heard such phrases all his training. They were carved into the walls of the barracks, painted on banners, shouted by drill instructors until they became part of your breathing. The code was simple. Absolute. A Japanese soldier does not surrender. He fights to the last bullet, and then he fixes his bayonet. When the bayonet breaks, he uses his hands. When his hands fail, he dies. Death is not the worst outcome. Capture is. My father, Kenji says, was a schoolteacher. He taught mathematics. He used to say that in mathematics, there are no noble lies. 2 + 2 is 4, whether you die honorably or live in shame. And what would he say about this? Lieutenant Sato gestures to the jungle, to the war, to their situation. He would say the equation has changed. But that we must solve it honestly. The lieutenant's smile is sad. "I think we are already solving it, Yamamoto. The question is what answer we will accept." Around them, the other men begin to stir. Private Tanaka, who once spoke of nothing but his father's fishing boat. Corporal Ito, who carried a book of poetry even after they abandoned their packs. Sergeant Nakamura, silent and gray-faced, his arm in a sling from a wound that has begun to smell wrong. They are not soldiers anymore. Not really. They are survivors, clinging to forms and rituals because the alternative, admitting that their world has already ended, is too terrible to face. Kenji remembers the day he received his conscription notice. Spring of 1943. He had been 20 years old, working in his uncle's shop, dreaming of studying engineering at university. The notice arrived on rice paper, stamped with the emperor's seal. His mother had wept quietly in the kitchen while his father stood rigid, arms at his sides, trying to look proud. March 12, 1945. Luzon, Philippines. Private First Class Yamamoto Kenji sits with his back against a banyan tree, his rifle across his knees, watching dawn break over mountains that no longer belong to Japan. The light comes slowly here, filtering through triple canopy jungle in shafts that remind him of the temple near his childhood home. But there are no prayers in this place. Only waiting. His unit, what remains of it, numbers 17 men. 3 weeks ago, they were a company of 143. The Americans did not destroy them in a single battle. They simply ground them down, day after day, patrol after patrol, until the jungle itself seemed to have swallowed the missing. Kenji's hands rest on his rifle, but his fingers trace the small photograph tucked into his breast pocket. His mother. His younger sister. The plum tree in their garden that would be blooming now, if spring had come to Osaka as it always did. He does not remove the photograph. To look at it would be to acknowledge how far away they are. How unreachable. Lieutenant Sato moves between the men, his boots making no sound on the forest floor. He has that way about him still, the bearing of an officer, even though his uniform hangs loose on a frame that has lost 20 pounds in as many days. He pauses beside Kenji, looking out at the same dawn. You are awake early, Yamamoto. I could not sleep, sir. None of us sleep well anymore. It is true. The Americans have a way of making the night unbearable. Loudspeakers broadcasting Japanese voices, calling them to surrender. Recorded messages from prisoners, promising food and safety. The voice of a captured officer explaining that Japan has lost the war, that continued resistance is meaningless. Kenji closes his eyes against the memory of last night's broadcast. The voice had sounded so certain. So rational. So much like surrender was simply common sense rather than the ultimate shame. They will try again today, Lieutenant Sato says quietly. The psychological warfare. Yes, sir. What do you think, Yamamoto? Are they telling the truth? The question startles Kenji. Officers do not ask such things. Officers give orders, and soldiers obey. That is the structure that holds the world together. Yet here, in this shrinking pocket of forest with no supply line and no hope of reinforcement, the old certainties have begun to crack. I think. Kenji chooses his words carefully. I think truth is less important than duty. Lieutenant Sato nods slowly. My grandfather would have said the same thing. He was a samurai, you know. Before the restoration. He had 2 swords and a philosophy that fit in 7 words, loyalty above life, honor before death. Kenji has heard such phrases all his training. They were carved into the walls of the barracks, painted on banners, shouted by drill instructors until they became part of your breathing. The code was simple. Absolute. A Japanese soldier does not surrender. He fights to the last bullet, and then he fixes his bayonet. When the bayonet breaks, he uses his hands. When his hands fail, he dies. Death is not the worst outcome. Capture is. My father, Kenji says, was a schoolteacher. He taught mathematics. He used to say that in mathematics, there are no noble lies. 2 + 2 is 4, whether you die honorably or live in shame. And what would he say about this? Lieutenant Sato gestures to the jungle, to the war, to their situation. He would say the equation has changed. But that we must solve it honestly. The lieutenant's smile is sad. I think we are already solving it, Yamamoto. The question is what answer we will accept. Around them, the other men begin to stir. Private Tanaka, who once spoke of nothing but his father's fishing boat. Corporal Ito, who carried a book of poetry even after they abandoned their packs. Sergeant Nakamura, silent and gray-faced, his arm in a sling from a wound that has begun to smell wrong. They are not soldiers anymore. Not really. They are survivors, clinging to forms and rituals because the alternative, admitting that their world has already ended, is too terrible to face. Kenji remembers the day he received his conscription notice. Spring of 1943. He had been 20 years old, working in his uncle's shop, dreaming of studying engineering at university. The notice arrived on rice paper, stamped with the emperor's seal. His mother had wept quietly in the kitchen while his father stood rigid, arms at his sides, trying to look proud. The American loudspeakers begin again at dusk. Kenji has learned to recognize the pattern. They wait until the light is failing, when the jungle becomes a maze of shadows and uncertainty, when the boundary between day and night blurs. That is when the voice comes, echoing through the trees like the call of some mechanical ghost. Tonight the voice is different. Not the usual recorded message, but something live, conversational. A Japanese man speaking with the accent of Tokyo, his words calm and measured. Soldiers of the Imperial Army. My name is Captain Suzuki Hiroshi. I was captured on Leyte 3 months ago. I am speaking to you from an American prisoner camp, where I am treated well and fed adequately. I know you have been told that capture means torture and death. I am here to tell you this is a lie. Kenji closes his eyes, but he cannot close his ears. The voice continues, relentless. I have not been beaten. I have not been humiliated. The Americans have medical care. They have food. They have honored the Geneva Convention. I am alive, and I will see my family when this war ends. Can you say the same? Around Kenji, the other men sit in frozen silence. No one moves. No one speaks. But everyone is listening. I know what you are thinking, Captain Suzuki's voice says. That I have betrayed my honor. That I am a coward. But ask yourselves, what is honor worth if you are dead? What good is loyalty to an empire that has abandoned you to die in a jungle? Your families want you alive. Your children want fathers. Your wives want husbands. There is no shame in survival. Lieutenant Sato appears beside Kenji, moving through the darkness like a shadow. His face is unreadable. Do not listen, Sato says quietly. But he does not order Kenji to cover his ears. He does not order anyone to move away. The broadcast continues for 20 minutes. Stories of other prisoners. Descriptions of camp conditions. Medical care. Food. Letters home. And beneath it all, the same message, you do not have to die. When the loudspeaker finally falls silent, the jungle seems louder than before. Insects. Night birds. The distant rumble of artillery. All the sounds of a war that continues whether they wish it or not. He was lying, Sergeant Nakamura says into the darkness. They forced him to speak. They probably tortured him first. Did he sound tortured? Corporal Ito asks. They are clever. The Americans. They know how to manipulate. Or, Ito says carefully, they are telling the truth. The silence that follows is heavy with danger. Nakamura could report Ito for defeatist talk. In a regular unit, such words might lead to execution. But here, in this dying pocket of resistance, the old rules seem increasingly absurd. I had a cousin, Private Tanaka says suddenly. He was captured in the Philippines. Last year. We heard through the Red Cross that he was alive. My aunt received a letter. Just 3 lines. But he was alive. The Red Cross can be fooled, Nakamura insists. Can they? Or do we tell ourselves that because the alternative is too difficult? Kenji finds himself speaking before he can stop himself. What if everything we have been told is backwards? What if surrender is not the shameful choice, but the brave one? To choose life over death, to reject the order to throw your life away, perhaps that takes more courage than pulling a trigger. The words hang in the darkness. Heresy. Treason. Truth. Lieutenant Sato turns to look at Kenji. In the moonlight filtering through the canopy, his face is half shadow, half silver light. When he speaks, his voice is very quiet. My grandfather would have killed you for saying that. He believed that death in battle was the highest achievement. He would have seen surrender as the destruction of the soul. Yes, sir. But my grandfather never fought in a war like this. He never saw an entire army vanish into the jungle. He never watched men starve slowly while their commanders lived safely in Manila, sending orders to fight to the last man over radio frequencies they knew we could no longer receive. Sato pauses. My grandfather's world was simpler. Honor was clear. Duty was absolute. But that world is gone. And we are still here. Sergeant Nakamura stands abruptly. I cannot listen to this. We are soldiers of the Emperor. We do not surrender. We do not question. We do not. We do not have a choice, Sergeant. Sato's voice hardened slightly. That is the real truth. The choice has already been made for us. We can die here over the next few days, slowly, pointlessly. Or we can choose to live. Those are the only two options left. Then I choose death. Nakamura's voice shakes with emotion. I choose honor. You choose. Sato asks. Or you simply accept what you have been told to choose. There is a difference. The argument could continue, but it is interrupted by a sound from the east. Engines. Many engines. The Americans are moving again, adjusting their perimeter, tightening the noose. The men scatter to their positions, an instinct that remains even when everything else has fallen apart. Kenji finds himself back against his banyan tree, rifle in hand, staring into a darkness that seems full of ghosts. He thinks about Captain Suzuki's voice. The matter-of-fact tone. The absence of fear or shame. The simple, radical claim, you do not have to die. All his life, Kenji has been taught to obey. First his father, then his teachers, then his drill instructors, then his officers. Obedience was the foundation of society, the glue that held Japan together. To question was to break that foundation. To refuse was to invite chaos. But what if obedience itself has become the chaos? What if the orders to die have no meaning beyond the vanity of commanders who will never face the consequences of their decisions? Kenji removes the photograph from his pocket. Even in the darkness, he can see his mother's smile. She had stood in the doorway as he left for training, her hand raised in farewell, her face composed. But he had seen her shoulders shake as he turned the corner. He had known she was weeping. If he dies here, she will receive a letter. Perhaps a posthumous promotion. A certificate of honor. Empty words to fill an empty space where her son used to be. If he surrenders, what then? Shame. Disgrace. But at least the possibility, however slim, of seeing her again. The mathematics, as his father would say, is actually quite simple. Death is certain and final. Surrender is uncertain but open-ended. Why should uncertainty be considered more shameful than certainty? Unless, Kenji thinks, the shame is the point. Unless the entire system is designed to value death over life, obedience over thought, because a soldier who questions is a soldier who might refuse. The realization hits him like cold water, he has been weaponized against himself. They have taught him to fear his own survival more than his own death. They have turned his mind into a cage, and handed him the key, and convinced him that opening the lock would be dishonorable. But he is holding the key right now. He can feel its weight. Yamamoto. Lieutenant Sato has returned, moving silently through the darkness. He crouches beside Kenji, looking out at the same patch of jungle, the same encroaching future. Sir. I am going to tell you something, and you must never repeat it. Do you understand? Yes, sir. I have decided to surrender. The words are so unexpected that Kenji thinks he has misheard. But Sato continues, his voice steady and resolved. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. But soon. In the next few days, I will approach an American position with a white flag. I will offer our surrender. Whoever wishes to come with me may do so. Whoever wishes to remain and die may do that as well. But I will not order men to throw their lives away for an abstraction. Sir, that is treason. Yes. It is also the most honorable thing I have ever done. Kenji's mind races. The sergeant. Nakamura. He will never agree. No. He will not. And that is his choice. Honor is personal, Yamamoto. It cannot be imposed from above. I have come to understand this too late, perhaps. But I understand it now. What will you tell the men? The truth. That I am offering them a choice. That each man must decide for himself what honor means. And that I will not judge anyone for choosing differently than I do. Sato stands, preparing to move on to the next man. But he pauses, looking down at Kenji. You asked earlier about courage. About whether surrender might be the braver choice. You were right. It takes no courage to die. Death is easy. It takes courage to live with consequences. To face judgment. To explain yourself. To rebuild. He pauses. To go home and admit that you chose survival over glory. That is hard. That is brave. He disappears into the darkness, leaving Kenji alone with his thoughts and his photograph and his slowly shifting understanding of what honor actually means. Above, the stars are invisible behind the triple canopy. But Kenji knows they are there. Fixed points in a universe that continues regardless of human drama. He thinks about his father, the mathematics teacher, who used to point out constellations and explain how ancient sailors navigated by their light. The stars do not judge, his father had said. They simply shine. They show you where you are. The rest is up to you. Kenji has been lost for a long time. Not geographically, he knows exactly where he is. But morally. Spiritually. Lost in a maze of orders and obligations that lead only to death. But now, perhaps, he can see a light. Not a star. Just a flashlight beam. The faint possibility of navigation towards something other than oblivion. He does not know if he has the courage to follow Lieutenant Sato's decision. But he knows, with sudden certainty, that he will not die for an abstraction. Whatever comes next, capture, shame, survival, judgment, it will be his choice. Not an order. Not a code. Not a philosophy written by men who lived in a different age. His choice. The thought is terrifying. The thought is liberating. The thought, Kenji realizes, is the first truly honest thought he has had since the war began. 3 days pass in a fevered dream of waiting and hunger. The rice runs out. The men try to forage, but the jungle offers little except bitterness. Private Tanaka finds some roots that might be edible. Corporal Ito catches a snake, which they cook over a fire so small it produces almost no light. The meat tastes of earth and fear. Sergeant Nakamura's arm has turned black. The smell is worse now, sweet and rotten. He does not complain, but his eyes have taken on a glassy quality that Kenji recognizes from other men who are already dying, who simply have not yet admitted it. On the morning of the 4th day, Lieutenant Sato calls them together. 17 men. 16 now. Private Hasegawa died during the night, quietly, without ceremony. They buried him under leaves because they had nothing for a proper grave. 16 men, gathered in a small clearing, surrounded by a jungle that seems to have swallowed the entire world. I have made a decision, Sato says. His voice is calm, but Kenji can see the tension in his shoulders. Tonight, I will surrender to the Americans. Anyone who wishes to come with me may do so. Anyone who wishes to remain may do that as well. I will order no one. Each man must choose for himself. The silence is absolute. Even the jungle seems to hold its breath. Sergeant Nakamura staggers to his feet. His face is pale, sheened with sweat. This is treason, Lieutenant. I cannot permit it. You cannot stop it, Sergeant. I can report you. To whom? We have no radio. No courier. No contact with command. Report me to the jungle if you wish. Nakamura's hand moves toward his sidearm, but the gesture is weak, uncertain. He sways slightly, and Corporal Ito moves to steady him. Please, Sergeant, Ito says quietly. Your arm. You need medical care. I need honor. Nakamura's voice breaks. I cannot. He collapses, not dramatically but simply, as if all the strength has leaked out of him at once. Ito lowers him to the ground, and Kenji sees that Nakamura is weeping, soundlessly, his face twisted with anguish that has nothing to do with physical pain. I cannot surrender, Nakamura whispers. I cannot face my father. I cannot face my ancestors. I cannot. Your father, Lieutenant Sato says gently, would want you to live. You do not know my father. Perhaps not. But I know mine. And I know what I want for my son. I want him to have a father, not a memory. Not a story about honor and death. Just a father. Private Tanaka speaks up, his voice trembling. If we surrender, what happens to our families? It is the question they have all been avoiding. Japanese military culture punishes not just the soldier who surrenders, but his entire family. Shame is hereditary, passed down like a genetic defect. A father who surrenders becomes a stain on his children's children, extending through generations. I do not know, Sato admits. Perhaps they will suffer. Perhaps they will be ostracized. But they will be alive to suffer. They will be alive to tell their own stories, to make their own choices. Is that not worth something? Kenji thinks of his sister. 15 years old when he left. She had wanted to be a teacher, like their father. She had shown him her notebooks, filled with careful calligraphy and mathematical equations. When you come back, she had said, you can help me study for the entrance exams. He had promised he would. If he dies here, that promise dies with him. If he surrenders, at least there is a chance, however slim, that he might keep it. I will come with you, Lieutenant, Kenji says. His voice is steady, though his hands shake. I choose to surrender. Traitor, Nakamura hisses from the ground. Perhaps. But I am a living traitor. That must count for something. Corporal Ito nods slowly. I also will come. Private Tanaka hesitates, then, and I. One by one, the men declare themselves. Some choose surrender. Some choose to remain. It is not a unanimous decision, but it does not need to be. For the first time in their military careers, they are being offered genuine choice. Sergeant Nakamura watches with hollow eyes. When the count is finished, 11 men choosing surrender, for choosing to stay, he speaks in a voice barely above a whisper. Take me with you. Sato kneels beside him. Sergeant. I do not. I cannot accept surrender. But I also cannot, my arm. He closes his eyes. I am already dead. I have been dead for days. I just did not want to admit it. You are not dead, Sergeant. My honor is. But my sister, she is to be married in the fall. I would like to see that. Even if I must do so in shame. It is the most honest thing Nakamura has said in weeks. The admission breaks something in him, and also mends something. He is still weeping, but the tears are different now. Not anguish. Something closer to relief. 12 men, then. 12 men who will walk into the American lines with white flags and trembling hands and the hope that they have been lied to about what comes next. For men who will remain. Private Kawamoto, whose brother died at Midway and who cannot forgive himself for surviving. Lance Corporal Saito, who believes with absolute conviction that death is the only honorable end. And 2 others, younger men whose names Kenji barely knows, who seem less convinced than simply terrified of change. Lieutenant Sato addresses all of them, his voice formal, respectful. For those who stay, you have my respect. Your choice is yours alone. When we leave tonight, whatever supplies remain will be yours. You may continue to resist, or you may withdraw deeper into the jungle, or you may choose your own path. I will not presume to advise you. He turns to the men who will come with him. For those who surrender, understand what you are choosing. We will be judged. By our families. By history. By ourselves. We are breaking the most sacred rule of our military culture. But I choose to believe, that there is more honor in choosing life than in accepting death simply because we were ordered to. If I am wrong. He shrugs. Then I will face that judgment when it comes. They spend the day in preparation. Not military preparation, there is no point in weapons or tactics now. Emotional preparation. Each man sitting alone with his thoughts, coming to terms with what is about to happen. Kenji writes a letter to his mother. He has no way to send it, but he writes it anyway, on a scrap of paper torn from his paybook. The words are simple. Asterisk mother, I am alive. I have chosen to live. I do not know if you can forgive me for surrendering, but I hope you will try. I am still your son. I still remember the plum tree. I still dream of home. I am coming back, if they will let me. If you will let me. Your son, Kenji, asterisk. He folds the letter carefully and tucks it into his pocket, next to the photograph. 2 pieces of paper. 2 promises. 2 reasons to survive. As darkness falls, the 12 men gather. They have fashioned white flags from torn undershirts. The fabric is dirty and thin, but white enough. Unmistakable. Lieutenant Sato addresses them one final time. What we do tonight, it is not cowardice. Remember that. It is not weakness. It is a choice made by men who understand that sometimes survival requires more courage than death. We walk toward an uncertain future. We accept shame to preserve life. We break one code to honor a deeper one, the code that says human life has value beyond what any army can assign it. He raises his white flag. Let us go. They move through the jungle in single file, silent except for the sound of boots on leaves and breath in lungs. Kenji's heart hammers in his chest. Every step feels like a betrayal. Every step feels like salvation. Behind them, the four men who chose to stay watch from the shadows. Private Kawamoto raises his hand in a silent farewell. It is the last thing Kenji sees of his old life, a hand raised in darkness, a gesture that could mean anything or nothing. Then they are moving toward the American lines, toward the lights and sounds of an enemy camp, toward a future that is completely unknown. Kenji thinks about his father's mathematics. The equation has changed. Death is no longer the highest virtue. Life, complicated, shameful, uncertain life, has become the solution they are solving for. He does not know if it is the right answer. But it is his answer. And for the first time since the war began, that feels like enough. They approach the American position at midnight. 12 men, moving slowly through jungle that seems determined to betray them. Every snapped twig sounds like a rifle shot. Every rustle could be an ambush. Kenji's hands are slick with sweat on his white flag, and he has to remind himself to breathe. Lieutenant Sato leads, his own flag held high, his posture stiff with a dignity that almost masks the terror beneath. They have removed all weapons except for Sato's officer's sword, which he carries at his side, not as a threat, but as a final acknowledgement of who he was, who he might never be again. 200 meters from the American perimeter, Sato stops. He turns to face his men, his voice barely a whisper. From this point, we announce ourselves. They must know we are surrendering, not attacking. If anyone wishes to turn back, now is the moment. No one moves. 12 faces in moonlight, pale and drawn, but set with a determination that has nothing to do with military training. Sato nods. He cups his hands around his mouth and calls out in Japanese, his voice carrying through the night. American soldiers. We are Japanese military. We wish to surrender. We have white flags. We are unarmed. The jungle falls silent. For 10 seconds, 20, there is no response. Kenji's heart races. This is the moment they could die, shot by nervous sentries who see only Japanese soldiers approaching in darkness. Then a voice calls back in badly accented Japanese, "Stay where you are. Drop any weapons. Keep your hands visible." Sato places his sword carefully on the ground. It is the only weapon among them, and letting it go seems to cost him something. His grandfather's sword. For generations of family honor in folded steel and silk binding. He steps away from it, leaving it in the dirt like a shed skin. Flashlight beams suddenly pierce the darkness. Kenji squints against the light, blinded, vulnerable. He can hear movement, boots, rustling equipment, the distinctive click of weapons being raised. 12 of you. Yes. 12. Keep your hands up. Walk forward slowly. If anyone moves wrong, we will shoot. They move as a group, a shuffling procession of defeated men with their hands raised and their flags drooping. Kenji can see American soldiers now, emerging from defensive positions, rifles trained on them. The Americans look young, not children, but not hardened veterans either. They look scared, which somehow makes Kenji feel less alone. An American officer steps forward. He is short, compact, with a face weathered beyond his years. He speaks in Japanese, the words carefully pronounced. "I am Lieutenant Morrison. You are prisoners of the United States Army. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Do any of you speak English?" "I speak some," Lieutenant Sato says. His English is stilted but clear. "I am Lieutenant Sato Hiroshi. These are my men. We surrender." Morrison nods. He does not smile, but something in his expression softens slightly. "You're making the right choice, Lieutenant. Smart choice." "It is not smart," Sato says quietly. "It is simply the only choice left." The Americans search them quickly, efficiently. Hands pat down pockets, checking for hidden weapons or grenades. Kenji feels fingers find his photograph, but the soldier does not take it, just confirms it is not a weapon and moves on. A small mercy. Sergeant Nakamura sways, his infected arm hanging limp at his side. An American medic notices, approaches carefully. This man needs a doctor. Badly. Yes, Sato confirms. He has been wounded for many days. The medic examines Nakamura's arm in the flashlight beam and grimaces. Jesus. This should have been treated a week ago. We need to get him to the battalion aid station. Now. They bring a stretcher. Nakamura tries to protest, tries to walk on his own, but his legs give out. As they lift him onto the canvas, he looks at Kenji with eyes that are fever-bright and utterly lost. I am still a soldier, he whispers. I have not surrendered. I have only. You have only chosen to live, Sergeant, Kenji says. There is no shame in that. But Nakamura's face says otherwise. For him, shame is not something that can be reasoned away. It is a weight he will carry forever, even if his life is saved. The Americans lead them to their camp in single file, rifles still ready, flashlights playing over their faces. Kenji feels himself studied, assessed, catalogued. He is no longer a soldier. He is a curiosity. A specimen. A defeated enemy. The camp is larger than Kenji expected. Tents and foxholes arranged in careful military precision. Generators humming. The smell of coffee and cigarette smoke. And something else, food. Real food. The scent of it makes Kenji's stomach clench painfully. He cannot remember the last time he ate something that was not roots or snake meat. They are brought to a guarded area, not a cage, but clearly a detention space. A tent surrounded by wire and sentries. Inside, there are cots, blankets, and a table with water in metal cups. It is more comfort than Kenji has known in months. Sit, Lieutenant Morrison says. We will process you in the morning. For now, rest. There is water. Food will come shortly. He pauses, looking at the 12 Japanese soldiers with something that might be compassion or might just be professional courtesy. You're safe now. Whatever you were told about American prison camps, most of it was probably lies. We don't torture. We don't execute prisoners. You'll be treated as POWs under international law. Your families will be notified through the Red Cross that you're alive. And when this war ends, you'll go home. The words should be comforting. Instead, they feel like a weight. Because going home means facing everyone who believed you were dead. It means explaining why you chose to live when you were supposed to die. It means carrying shame like a banner for the rest of your life. Morrison leaves. The guards take positions outside the tent. The 12 men sit on cots, staring at each other, at the walls, at their own hands. No one speaks. What is there to say? Finally, Private Tanaka breaks the silence. Is it real? What he said about treatment? We will find out, Lieutenant Sato replies. His voice is flat, drained. Kenji lies back on a cot, an actual cot, with canvas and a thin mattress, more luxury than he has known since basic training. He stares at the tent ceiling and tries to process what has just happened. He has surrendered. He is a prisoner. He is alive. The mathematics checks out. But it does not feel like victory. An American soldier brings food. Metal trays with portions that seem enormous, rice, some kind of meat, vegetables, bread. The men eat slowly, carefully, their shrunken stomachs protesting the sudden abundance. Kenji forces himself to take small bites, to savor each one, to remember that this is real. He is eating food given to him by his enemy. He is wearing the clothes of a prisoner. He is alive in a way that feels like a betrayal of everything he once believed. But he is alive. That night, lying on his cot while the other men sleep or pretend to sleep, Kenji allows himself to weep. Not from pain or fear, but from a grief he cannot name. He is mourning himself, the version of himself who believed the code, who thought honor was simple, who never questioned whether there might be another way. That man is dead. Kenji killed him when he raised the white flag. But the man who remains, this uncertain, ashamed, living man, is the one who will have to carry what comes next. Outside, the American camp continues its routine. Sentries change. Officers brief. The war goes on. But for 12 Japanese soldiers in a guarded tent, the war has ended in a way that is not an ending at all. It is a beginning. Complicated, shameful, uncertain. But a beginning nonetheless. Morning brings a different kind of terror. Kenji wakes to sunlight filtering through canvas, to the sound of American voices and clanking equipment, to the reality that yesterday was not a fever dream. He has surrendered. He is a prisoner. He is alive. An American corporal enters the tent, carrying a clipboard. He is young, maybe 19, with freckles and a nervous energy. He speaks no Japanese, so he simply gestures, "You, come with me." Kenji stands. His legs are unsteady from malnutrition and exhaustion, but he follows the corporal out of the tent, into bright morning light that makes him squint. The American camp looks different in daylight. Organized. Professional. Nothing like the desperate, shrinking positions Kenji has occupied for months. There are supply tents, motor pools, artillery positions arranged with geometric precision. This is not an army on the edge of collapse. This is an army that has won. The corporal leads him to a larger tent with guards posted at the entrance. Inside, 2 officers sit at a folding table. One is American, late 30s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the bearing of an academic. The other is Japanese-American, younger, with the translation insignia on his uniform. "Sit down, Private," the Japanese-American officer says in perfect Japanese. His accent is West Coast, California, maybe. "I am Lieutenant Tanaka, translator for U.S. Army Intelligence. This is Major Williams. We have some questions." Kenji sits. His hands are shaking, so he clasps them in his lap. "You understand you are a prisoner of war? That you are protected under the Geneva Convention?" "Yes." "Good. Let me be clear, this is not an interrogation in the sense you might fear. We are not going to torture you or threaten you. We simply want to gather information about Japanese positions, troop strengths, morale. Standard military intelligence. If you cooperate, you will be treated well. If you refuse, you will still be treated well, but it will take longer to process you." Major Williams speaks in English, and Lieutenant Tanaka translates. "What unit were you with?" Kenji hesitates. Even now, even after surrender, the instinct to protect military information is strong. But what is the point? The war is lost. Everyone knows it except the men still dying in the jungle. 116th Infantry Regiment. 5th Company. "And your commanding officer?" "Lieutenant Sato Hiroshi. He surrendered with us." Williams nods, making notes. "How many men in your company originally?" 143. 3 weeks ago. Now, 16. 4 stayed behind. Stayed behind to fight. To die, Kenji says quietly. They chose to die rather than surrender. Williams and Tanaka exchange glances. The translator asks, "And why did you choose differently?" The question is simple but devastating. Why did you choose to live? How do you explain that to someone who has never had to make that choice? Because. Kenji struggles with the words. Because I realized that death for its own sake is not honor. It is waste. That's a very rational conclusion, Major Williams says through the translator. Not everyone reaches it. No. Most do not. The interrogation continues for 2 hours. Questions about supply lines, command structures, defensive positions. Kenji answers truthfully, though each answer feels like a small betrayal. He is giving information that might be used against Japanese soldiers, men like his former comrades, men who still believe in the code he has abandoned. But he is also acknowledging reality. The war is lost. These positions will fall whether he speaks or not. All he can do is perhaps save lives, American lives, yes, but also Japanese ones. If accurate intelligence prevents unnecessary battles, fewer men die. That must count for something. Finally, Major Williams leans back in his chair. He speaks in halting Japanese, bypassing the translator. You made, hard choice. Brave choice. Many soldiers, they fight because easier than think. You think. That is good. The broken grammar makes the sentiment more honest somehow. Kenji nods, unable to speak. One more question, William says, back through the translator. What would you tell other Japanese soldiers if you could? If they asked you about surrender? Kenji considers this carefully. What would he say? What would have convinced him, 3 weeks ago, when he still believed in absolute honor? I would tell them that the code we were taught, death before surrender, was created by men who never had to live it. It is a philosophy for generals, not for soldiers. And I would tell them that their families want them alive. That living with shame is better than dying for pride. But... He pauses. I do not think most would listen. The shame is too strong. The code is too deep. But you listened. I listened because I had a lieutenant who was willing to question. And because I was already dying anyway. Starvation breaks many things, including certainty. Williams nods slowly. He makes a final note, then closes his folder. Thank you, Private Yamamoto. You've been very helpful. You'll be transported to a larger POW camp within the next few days. There you'll have better facilities, regular food, medical care. It's not freedom, but it's survival. Thank you, sir. As Kenji stands to leave, Lieutenant Tanaka speaks again, his voice softer, more personal. My parents came from Hiroshima. They immigrated to California before I was born. They raised me American, but they taught me Japanese too. They taught me about honor and duty and all those principles. And you know what? When the war started, I was sent to an internment camp. Me. American-born, American-educated. Locked up because of my ancestry. He pauses, his eyes meeting Kenji's. Honor is complicated, Private. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You chose to live. That's enough. Kenji leaves the tent with tears in his eyes. He has been given permission, from an enemy, from a stranger, to forgive himself. He does not know if he can accept that permission. But he is grateful for the offering. Back in the detention tent, the other men are waiting. They look at him anxiously. Were you tortured? What did they ask? Did you tell them anything? They asked about our unit. Our positions. I told them the truth. Sergeant Nakamura, returned from the aid station with his arm properly bandaged, looks at Kenji with hollow eyes. You betrayed your comrades. I acknowledged reality. There is a difference. Is there? We are prisoners, Yamamoto. We have lost everything. Our honor. Our dignity. Our place in society. What difference does reality make? Lieutenant Sato intervenes, his voice gentle but firm. We have lost one kind of honor, Sergeant. But perhaps we have gained another. The honor of choosing consciously rather than obeying blindly. That is not honor. That is rationalization. Perhaps. But it is the rationalization that keeps us alive. The argument could continue, but Private Tanaka speaks up, his voice trembling. I received news. About my family. The Red Cross. My father, he died last year. Bombing raid. My mother and sisters are alive, living with relatives in the countryside. They think I am dead. But they will be notified now. They will know I am alive. His face is wet with tears. I do not know if they will be ashamed of me. I do not know if they will want me back. But they will know. That has to mean something. It means everything. It means nothing. It means that the mathematics of survival is infinitely more complicated than any equation Kenji's father ever taught him. That night, lying on his cot, Kenji takes out the photograph of his mother. He studies her face in the dim light, trying to imagine what she will think when she receives the notification. Your son is alive. Your son surrendered. Your son chose life over honor. Will she weep with relief? Or with shame? He does not know. He may never know. But he is alive to wonder about it, and that must count for something. Outside the tent, the American guards change shifts. Someone is playing a harmonica, a mournful tune that sounds almost Japanese in its melancholy. Kenji closes his eyes and listens, and for the first time since the war began, he allows himself to imagine a future. Not a glorious future. Not a future where he is welcomed home as a hero. Just a future. A space in time where he exists, where he breathes, where he might see his mother's face again. It is a small thing to hope for. But right now, it is everything. 3 weeks in the prisoner camp, and Kenji begins to understand what it means to live in limbo. The camp is larger than he expected, hundreds of Japanese prisoners, most captured in the same desperate circumstances as Kenji's group. Some have been here for months. They have created a strange half-society, bound by shared shame and uncertain futures. There is a hierarchy even here. Officers keep their distance from enlisted men, maintaining the forms of military discipline even though rank has no meaning anymore. Some prisoners organize themselves into work details, desperate for structure. Others sit in silence, staring at nothing, their minds retreating from a reality too painful to accept. Kenji finds himself drawn to the camp's small library, a collection of books donated by the Red Cross. Most are in English, but there are a few Japanese texts. Poetry. Philosophy. A worn copy of the Tale of Genji. He reads slowly, remembering his father's voice reading aloud when Kenji was a child. One afternoon, an older prisoner sits beside him. His name is Captain Fujimoto, and he has been captured since the fall of Saipan, nearly a year ago. His face is lined with a weariness that goes beyond physical exhaustion. What are you reading, young man? Basho's haiku. I am trying to remember what beauty feels like. Fujimoto nods. A worthy pursuit. I spend my days trying to remember what honor feels like. So far, I have been unsuccessful. They sit in companionable silence for a while. Then Fujimoto speaks again, his voice very quiet. Do you know what the hardest part is? Not the captivity. Not the shame. It is the waiting. We are in a strange place between war and peace, between death and life. We exist, but we do not quite live. And every day, we wonder what comes next. The Americans say we will be sent home when the war ends. Yes. Home. But home to what? To families who believe we are cowards. To a society that has no place for failed soldiers. To a Japan that may not even exist by the time we return. Kenji has no answer. He has been avoiding these questions, focusing on day-to-day survival, on the immediate relief of being alive. But Fujimoto is right, the future is a void that grows larger with each passing day. I had a son, Fujimoto continues. He would be 17 now. I have not seen him since he was 12. When I think of him, I see a boy. But he is a young man now. He does not know his father is alive. And when he learns, what will he think? Will he be relieved? Or will he be ashamed that his father is a prisoner rather than a glorious war dead? Perhaps, Kenji says carefully, he will simply be glad to have a father. You are young. You still have hope. I admire that. But Kenji does not feel young. He feels ancient, worn down by choices that should never have been necessary. He thinks about his sister, preparing for university exams without her brother to help her. He thinks about his mother, who may have already held a funeral for him, who may have already begun the long process of mourning. What will resurrection mean to them? Will it be a blessing or a burden? That evening, Lieutenant Sato calls together the men from their original group. All 12 of them have survived the initial weeks of captivity. Sergeant Nakamura's arm is healing, though he will never have full use of it again. Private Tanaka has received more news from his family, his sisters are safe, and they want him to come home. I have been thinking, Sato says, about what we will tell people. About our surrender. About our choices. And I have realized that we need to claim our narrative. We need to decide what this means before someone else decides for us. What do you mean? Corporal Ito asks. I mean that the story of our surrender will be told. Either we tell it, or it will be told about us. Either we frame it as a choice made consciously, with full awareness of the costs, or it will be framed as weakness. As cowardice. But it was weakness, Nakamura says bitterly. We broke. We gave up. No, Sato says firmly. We chose. There is a difference. To break is to be destroyed by circumstance. To choose is to exercise agency even in impossible situations. We chose life over death. We chose family over code. We chose to question rather than obey blindly. That is not weakness. That is moral courage. Kenji feels something shift in his chest. Sato is offering them something precious, a way to think about their surrender that does not require them to hate themselves. It may not be enough. It may not convince their families or their society. But it is a beginning. We will write letters, Sato continues. To our families. To anyone who will listen. We will explain, as clearly as we can, why we made this choice. We will not apologize for surviving. We will simply tell the truth. Over the next days, the men write. Some struggle for words. Some write pages and pages, trying to justify the unjustifiable. Some write simple statements, *I am alive. I chose this. I am sorry if this brings shame, but I am alive, *. Kenji's letter to his mother grows longer with each draft. He writes about the jungle, about the hunger, about watching men die slowly from wounds and disease. He writes about Lieutenant Sato's courage in offering them a choice. He writes about the mathematics of survival, the cold calculation that life, even shameful life, might be worth more than honorable death. He does not know if his mother will understand. But he writes anyway, because the act of writing is itself a form of resistance. It is insisting that his story, their story, has meaning beyond what the code dictates. Captain Fujimoto reads Kenji's letter one afternoon, with Kenji's permission. When he finishes, his eyes are wet. This is a brave letter, young man. Braver than most military citations I have read. It feels like making excuses. No. It feels like claiming your own humanity. That is different. The camp life continues. Some days are easier than others. Some days Kenji can almost convince himself that he made the right choice, that survival justifies the shame. Other days, the weight of it is crushing. He thinks about the 4 men who stayed behind, who chose death over surrender. Were they braver than him? Or simply more imprisoned by the code? He does not know. Perhaps there is no answer. Perhaps this is simply the cost of consciousness, to question, to doubt, to live with ambiguity rather than certainty. One afternoon, a group of new prisoners arrives. They are skeletal, barely able to walk, their uniforms in tatters. They have been in the jungle for months, surviving on almost nothing, fighting a war that has already been lost. When they see the camp, the food, the medical care, the relative safety, some of them weep openly. Kenji helps distribute food to the new arrivals. One of them, a young private no more than 19, looks at him with eyes that have seen too much. Is it true? What they say about surrender? That we are safe here? Yes, Kenji says. You are safe. I thought surrender meant death. Worse than death. We were all told that. We were all wrong. The young private eats slowly, tears running down his face. My mother, does she know? That I am alive? She will know. The Red Cross will notify her. Will she forgive me? Kenji has no answer for that. He cannot even answer it for himself. That night, writing another draft of his letter, Kenji realizes something. He is not writing to justify his choice to his mother. He is writing to justify it to himself. He is trying to believe his own story, to convince himself that survival is not the same as cowardice. He does not know if he will succeed. But he keeps writing anyway, because the alternative, to stop writing, to stop thinking, to stop questioning, would be a different kind of surrender. A surrender of the self rather than to the enemy. And that, Kenji decides, is the one surrender he will not make. August 15, 1945. The camp loudspeakers crackle to life at noon. All prisoners are ordered to assembly area. Something in the American guards' faces tells Kenji this is different. Not a routine announcement. Something fundamental. He files into the open space with hundreds of other prisoners, all of them silent, all of them sensing that the world is about to shift again. An American colonel takes the platform, with Lieutenant Tanaka beside him to translate. The colonel's face is solemn, almost reverent. Gentlemen. The war is over. Japan has surrendered unconditionally to the Allied forces. Emperor Hirohito will broadcast a message to the Japanese people announcing this surrender. The recording will be played for you now. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. Then the loudspeakers crackle again, and the emperor's voice, high, thin, filtered through layers of static and radio transmission, begins to speak. Kenji has never heard the emperor's voice before. No civilian has. The emperor is divine, beyond human contact, beyond human sound. Yet here he is, speaking in formal, archaic Japanese that is almost incomprehensible. But certain phrases come through clearly. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. We must bear the unbearable and endure the insufferable. I have ordered the imperial government to accept the Allied terms. Surrender. Total surrender. The divine emperor, who cannot be defeated, has admitted defeat. Around Kenji, men begin to collapse. Not physically, though some do fall to their knees, but spiritually. The emperor's voice is not just announcing the end of the war. It is announcing the end of their entire worldview. Everything they believed, everything they were taught, everything they died for, it was for nothing. Kenji feels strangely calm. He has already made his peace with defeat. He surrendered 3 months ago. This is simply the world catching up to him. But others are not so fortunate. Captain Fujimoto, standing nearby, makes a sound like a wounded animal. Sergeant Nakamura, who has been slowly accepting his survival, begins to weep uncontrollably. Some prisoners cry out in anger. Some in disbelief. Some simply stare at the loudspeakers as if the emperor's voice is a hallucination. The broadcast ends. The silence that follows is heavier than anything that came before. The American colonel speaks again, his voice gentle. You will all be repatriated over the coming months. Your families have been notified of your status. You will go home. Home. The word should be comforting. Instead, it is terrifying. Because now Kenji must actually face what he has done. Not as a theoretical shame, but as a concrete reality. He will return to Osaka, to his neighborhood, to his family. And everyone will know, he surrendered. He is a prisoner. He chose life over honor. That night, the camp is chaos. Some prisoners are relieved, almost giddy with the news that they will see their families again. Others are despondent, talking openly about suicide. The shame of capture was bearable as long as Japan was still fighting. But now? Now they are prisoners of a lost war. Their surrender was not even useful. Lieutenant Sato gathers their group again. All 12 men, plus Captain Fujimoto, who has attached himself to them as a kind of honorary member. We must decide, Sato says, how we will return. What story we will tell. The truth, Kenji says. We tell the truth. But what is the truth? Nakamura asks. His voice is hollow. That we gave up. That we chose shame over duty? No, Sato says firmly. The truth is that we recognized a lost cause and chose to preserve our lives for a future that might still have meaning. The truth is that we exercise judgment rather than blind obedience. The truth is that we are men, not machines. People will not see it that way, Fujimoto says. They will see cowards. Traitors. Some will. But not all. And more importantly, we must not see ourselves that way. We must believe in the choice we made, or we will be destroyed by shame. It is easier said than done. Kenji lies awake that night, imagining his return. Walking down familiar streets where neighbors turn away. Entering his home where his mother greets him with tears of shame rather than joy. Watching his sister avoid his eyes because her brother is a prisoner. The images are torture. But they are also necessary. He must prepare himself for the worst, so that anything less will feel like mercy. The repatriation begins in September. They are moved to ships, transported back to Japan in crowded holds that remind Kenji of livestock pens. But they are going home. That must count for something. On the ship, Kenji meets another prisoner, an older man who had been a Buddhist priest before the war. His name is Tanaka-san, and he speaks with a calm that seems impossible given their circumstances. You are troubled, he observes. Afraid of what awaits. Yes. My family. What will they think of me? Tanaka-san nods. This is natural. But consider, your family grieved you as dead. Now you will return, alive. That is a gift, regardless of the circumstances. But the shame. Shame is a story we tell ourselves. It has power only if we give it power. You can choose to define yourself by your surrender, or you can choose to define yourself by your survival. Both are true. Which truth you emphasize is up to you. But society will judge. Society always judges. That is its nature. But you do not control society. You only control yourself. The words are simple, but they lodge in Kenji's mind like seeds. He does not know if they will grow into comfort or merely wither into more doubt. But he considers them anyway, because he has nothing else. The ship reaches Yokohama in October. The city is devastated, bombs have turned entire districts to rubble. But the harbor is still functioning, and crowds have gathered to meet the returning prisoners. Kenji scans the crowd, looking for his mother's face. He does not find her. Perhaps she has not been notified. Perhaps she chose not to come. Perhaps, and this thought is worst of all, she does not want to see him. They are processed through a military intake center. Records are checked. Family contacts are verified. Kenji learns that his mother and sister are alive, living in the countryside outside Osaka. His father died in a bombing raid 2 years ago. Kenji will never be able to explain his choice to him. Will never be able to ask if survival was worth the shame. They are given train tickets home. Lieutenant Sato clasps Kenji's hand before they part. Whatever happens, Yamamoto, remember, we chose consciously. That makes us human. Honor that humanity, even if others do not. Kenji nods, unable to speak. The train journey to Osaka takes 2 days. Kenji sits by the window, watching Japan pass by, a country he left 3 years ago that no longer exists. The cities are broken. The people are exhausted. The war has consumed everything. At Osaka Station, he steps onto the platform with his small bag and his overwhelming shame. The crowd flows around him, people going about their lives, none of them knowing that he is a returning prisoner, a man who surrendered. He takes a bus to his mother's new address. A small house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by vegetable gardens. His hand shakes as he knocks on the door. His sister opens it. She is 20 now, no longer a child. She stares at him for a long moment, her face cycling through shock, disbelief, joy, and something else, something harder to name. Kenji. Her voice is barely a whisper. Yes. I am home. We were told you were dead. I am sorry. I surrendered. I am a prisoner. I was a prisoner. I do not know what I am. His sister's face crumples. She pulls him into the house, calling for their mother. His mother appears from the kitchen. She is older, grayer, worn down by years of war and loss. When she sees Kenji, she freezes. Then she rushes forward and grasps his face in her hands, studying him as if to confirm he is real. My son. My son, you are alive. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Hush. Her voice is fierce. You are alive. You are home. That is all that matters. But I surrendered. I broke the code. His mother slaps him. Not hard, but enough to shock him into silence. You chose to live. You chose to come back to me. Do you think I care about codes? About honor? I have lost your father. I have lost everything. But you are here. You are alive. That is the only honor I need. Kenji begins to weep. Not quietly, but in great, racking sobs that come from somewhere deep in his chest. His mother holds him, and his sister joins them, and for the first time in 3 years, Kenji feels like he might actually be home. It will not be easy. Neighbors will judge. Society will condemn. He will carry the shame of surrender for the rest of his life. But he is alive. And his mother's hands are on his face, and his sister is crying, and they are together. The mathematics, Kenji realizes, was always simple. Life equals possibility. Death equals nothing. He chose possibility. Whatever comes next, he will face it alive. 23 years later. Osaka, 1968. Kenji stands in the doorway of a small classroom, watching his daughter, 10 years old, serious-faced, meticulous, solve a mathematics problem on the blackboard. Her name is Yuki, and she has inherited her grandfather's love of numbers. She does not know her grandfather. He died before she was born, killed in a bombing raid during the war. But she carries his legacy anyway, in the careful way she works through equations, in her insistence on finding the right answer even when the problem is difficult. Kenji has told her some stories about her grandfather. The schoolteacher who believed in honesty above all else. The man who said that 2 plus 2 is always 4, regardless of how you feel about it. But he has not told her everything. Some stories are too heavy for children. The teacher, a young woman fresh from university, notices Kenji and waves him in. It is parent observation day, and Kenji has taken time off from his job at the shipping company to attend. He works in logistics now, calculating routes and cargo weights, using the mathematics his father taught him to make his living. It is quiet work. Honorable work. And it does not require him to explain his past to anyone. Your daughter is quite gifted, the teacher says during the break. Very methodical. Very precise. She could have a future in engineering, if she wishes. Her grandfather would have been proud, Kenji says. He was a teacher. Yes. Before the war. Ah. The teacher's face shifts slightly. That careful neutrality that people adopt when the war is mentioned. Because the war is everywhere and nowhere in Japan now. It happened. It shaped everything. But no one wants to talk about it. Especially no one wants to talk about prisoners. About men who surrendered. Kenji has learned to navigate this silence. He does not volunteer his history. He does not explain that he spent months in an American prison camp. He does not mention the shame that still lives in his chest like a stone, even after 2 decades. He simply lives. He works. He raises his daughter. He tries to be a good husband to his wife, Sachiko, who married him despite knowing his history, who has never once made him feel less than whole. But the shame is always there. In the way certain neighbors avoid his eyes. In the way his sister's husband, a man who fought to the bitter end, who was never captured, speaks to him with barely concealed contempt. In the way he sometimes wakes in the night, hearing the emperor's voice on the loudspeaker, announcing surrender. Yuki returns from the blackboard, her problem solved correctly. She shows her father the work, proud of her solution. Very good, Kenji says. Your grandfather would say this is excellent reasoning. Papa, will you tell me about the war? The question is sudden, unexpected. Kenji feels his chest tighten. Why do you ask? My friend Michiko says her grandfather was a war hero. He has medals. She is very proud. But you never talk about the war. Kenji looks at his daughter's face, so open, so trusting, so certain that her father has a story worth telling. He thinks about lying. About inventing a narrative that would make her proud. But his father's voice echoes in his mind, * 2 plus 2 is 4. Truth is not negotiable, *. I was in the war, he says carefully. I was a soldier. But I did not fight until the end. I surrendered. Yuki's face shows confusion, not judgment. She is too young to understand the weight of that word. What does that mean? It means that I chose to stop fighting. To become a prisoner rather than die. Was that wrong? The question is so pure, so free of the cultural baggage that has defined Kenji's adult life, that he almost laughs. Many people thought so. Many still do. But I believed it was the right choice. I wanted to come home. To see my family. To have a life. To have me. Yes. To have you. Yuki considers this. Then she nods, as if the math has worked out satisfactorily. Then it was a good choice. Kenji's eyes sting with sudden tears. His daughter has just given him something he has been seeking for 23 years, permission to believe his own narrative. That evening, after Yuki is asleep, Kenji sits with Sachiko on their small porch. They live in a modest house, nothing grand, but it is theirs. They have built a life together from very little, Kenji's shame, Sachiko's determination to see beyond it, and the shared belief that the future might be better than the past. Yuki asked about the war today, Kenji says. Sachiko nods. She is at that age. Curious about history. I told her. About the surrender. And she said it was a good choice. Because otherwise she would not exist. Sachiko takes his hand. She is right. But the shame. The shame is yours to carry or put down, Kenji. I have told you this before. Yuki does not carry it. Your mother did not carry it. I do not carry it. Only you. Society. Society moves on. Japan has rebuilt. People have new concerns. Your surrender is ancient history to everyone except you. The words are harsh but true. Kenji has been carrying a burden that, perhaps, no one is asking him to carry anymore. Or perhaps they are, but their asking has no power unless he grants it. He thinks about Lieutenant Sato, who he heard died 5 years ago. Heart attack. But Kenji remembers him as he was in the jungle, a man brave enough to offer choice rather than orders. A man who believed that consciousness was more valuable than obedience. He thinks about Captain Fujimoto, who opened a small bookshop after the war and lived quietly until his death. Who wrote poetry about resilience and transformation, never mentioning the war directly but carrying it in every line. He thinks about his mother, who died 3 years ago, her final words to him, "You came home. That is all I ever wanted." They are all gone now. The war generation is passing. And what remains? Just stories. Competing narratives about honor and shame, courage and cowardice, choice and duty. Kenji realizes, sitting on his porch with his wife's hand in his, that he has a choice now too. Not about what happened, that is fixed, unchangeable. But about what it means. He can define his life by his surrender. Let that moment in the jungle be the thing that defines him forever. Or he can define his life by what came after, the rebuilding, the marriage, the daughter who solves equations with her grandfather's precision and her father's persistence. Both are true. Both are his story. But which story he tells himself, which story he gives to his daughter, which story becomes his legacy, that is his choice. I think, Kenji says slowly, that I am tired of being ashamed. Sachiko smiles. Good. It has been 23 years. That is long enough. What if people judge? They will. But they judge anyway. You cannot control that. You can only control how much power you give their judgment. Kenji thinks about this. His father's mathematics. The equation of a life. On one side, shame, judgment, social condemnation. On the other side, his daughter's smile, his wife's hand, the quiet satisfaction of work done well, the possibility of more years, more choices, more life. The equation balances. It has always balanced. He was just looking at it wrong. Years pass. Kenji grows older. His daughter graduates university, engineering, just as her teacher predicted. She gets married. She has children of her own. And one day, when her son is old enough to understand, she tells him about his great-grandfather. He was a soldier in World War II. And he made a very brave choice. He chose to live when everyone expected him to die. The boy, Kenji's grandson, named Kenji after him, asks, was he a hero? Yuki considers the question. I think he was. Not the kind of hero who gets medals. But the kind who makes hard choices and lives with them. The kind who chooses family over glory. The kind who believes that life itself has value. This story reaches Kenji years later, when he is elderly, his hands shaking but his mind still sharp. He is sitting in the garden of his daughter's house, watching cherry blossoms fall, when Yuki tells him about the conversation. I told him you were brave, she says. Kenji's eyes fill with tears. I do not know if that is true. Of course it is true. You chose to live. You chose to come home. You chose to be my father. That took courage. And suddenly, after all these years, Kenji believes her. The shame does not vanish. It has been part of him for too long to simply disappear. But it loosens its grip. It becomes something he can hold at arm's length and examine rather than something that defines him. He surrendered. Yes. That is fact. But he also survived. He also built a life. He also raised a daughter who is proud of him. He also lived long enough to see cherry blossoms fall in his grandson's garden. These are also facts. And they weigh just as much. The mathematics, Kenji realizes in his old age, was always about addition, not subtraction. His surrender did not erase him. It added complexity. It added nuance. It added the possibility of this moment, this garden, this light on cherry blossoms. When Kenji dies, at the age of 76, his funeral is small but genuine. His family remembers him not as a soldier who surrendered, but as a man who chose life and made something meaningful from that choice. They place his ashes in the family grave, next to his parents'. No special honors. No military recognition. Just a name and a date and the simple fact of a life lived. His grandson, years later, will write a book about prisoners of war from the Pacific Theater. He will interview survivors, collect stories, try to understand the impossible choices his generation never had to face. And in that book, he will write, "My grandfather taught me that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet decision to keep living when death would be easier. Sometimes it is the willingness to face shame for the possibility of seeing another sunrise. Sometimes it is simply saying yes to life, even when life has become complicated beyond bearing." The book will not be famous. But it will be read. And some people, reading it, will begin to understand that surrender is not always simple. That honor is not always clear. That the mathematics of survival is written in a language more complex than any code can capture. Kenji's story does not have a triumphant ending. He does not receive posthumous recognition. He does not become a symbol of anything larger than himself. But he lived. He chose, consciously and deliberately, to live. And from that choice came a daughter, a grandson, a great-granddaughter, generations of people who exist only because one man in a jungle decided that life was worth more than an abstract principle. That is his honor. Not the honor of codes and commands, but the honor of consciousness, of choice, of insisting, even in the darkest moment, that his life belonged to him. The white flag he raised in the Philippine jungle in 1945 was not a symbol of defeat. It was a symbol of agency. Of a man saying, "I choose this. I claim this. I will live with this." And he did. For 76 years, he lived with it. The shame and the joy, the judgment and the love, the weight and the lightness. He lived. And in the end, that was enough. The cherry blossoms continue to fall in Osaka every spring, indifferent to human stories of honor and shame. They fall on the graves of heroes and cowards alike, making no distinction. Because the blossoms understand what it took Kenji a lifetime to learn, life is its own justification. Survival is its own honor. Everything else is just words.